After 5 years of marriage, I discovered my wife was cheating on me. I stood outside the door, hearing her speak to her lover in that soft, seductive voice. "What are you afraid of? He's poor and spineless. Do you think he'd dare to divorce me?" I clenched the lottery ticket in my hand. Just moments ago, I had won £5 million. This time, I'd like to see who's really poor and spineless. Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. On my way to deliver food, tempted by a colleague, I bought a lottery ticket. Whether it was divine intervention or sheer luck, I won £6 million. As I stared at the message on my phone prompting me to claim my prize, I couldn't quite describe my emotions. All I knew was that I was ecstatic. Finally, Lady Luck had smiled upon me, treating me like her favorite grandchild. I rushed home, eager to share the good news with my wife. Earlier that morning, I had told her I might be too busy to come home for lunch. Now I planned to surprise her. We had been married for years, enduring hardships together. At last, she could enjoy the fruits of our labor alongside me. However, as I opened the front door, I was greeted by an unexpected sight: a pair of men's leather shoes on the shoe rack. They were immaculate, clearly belonging to a businessman. Given my job as a food delivery driver, I rarely invested in such footwear. A seed of doubt sprouted in my mind. I knew I shouldn't think ill of my wife after all. She had been by my side for years. I thought I knew her well. Nevertheless, I found myself treading lightly as I entered the house. The living room was eerily quiet. My wife, who usually busied herself with housework, was nowhere to be seen. I was about to call out, asking where she was, when I heard a sound coming from the bedroom. Our old house had poor soundproofing. Despite the distance, if someone made too much noise in the bedroom, it could be heard. I crept towards the bedroom. Before I reached the door, I saw clothes strewn across the floor, both men's and women's. The implications were clear. I could hardly believe my eyes. Had my sweet, gentle wife been unfaithful? I tried to control my emotions, reminding myself not to jump to conclusions until I saw who was inside, though the evidence was damning. As I approached the bedroom door, I realized it wasn't fully closed. In their haste, they had left it ajar. Through that small gap, I saw my wife with another man. They were in the throes of passion, oblivious to my presence. The man was someone I recognized, my good friend, Stanley Parsons. In an instant, I felt as if I'd been plunged into an icy abyss. I stood frozen at the door, hidden from their view due to the angle. This moment of stillness allowed me to truly see her for who she was. I heard Stanley ask my wife, "You're so eager. Aren't you worried Nicholas might find out? Aren't you afraid?" Between labored breaths, she replied, "What's there to be afraid of? Even if that pathetic excuse for a man discovers us, what can he do? Does he dare to divorce me? He doesn't know his own worth. The coward." As I heard these words, I clutched the lottery ticket in my hand. The coward she spoke of had just won £6 million and had been rushing home to share the joyous news with her. I had given her my heart, and now I felt utterly foolish. In just a few short hours, my life turned upside down. I won a massive lottery jackpot, only to discover my wife was cheating on me. I sat on a park bench for a long time, lost in thought. I was furious at my wife's infidelity and my friend's betrayal. They had always acted so proper in front of me, but behind my back they were plotting against me. Watching a snail slowly crawl along the ground at my feet, a plan began to form in my mind. If they were going to be so heartless, they couldn't blame me for what I was about to do. I went to my office and resigned. The process was quick, as the company had been looking to downsize anyway. In less than 2 hours, I had everything sorted. I also went to the bank and opened a new account. I had no intention of sharing my lottery winnings with that ungrateful woman. She didn't deserve it. After taking care of everything, I leisurely made my way home. When I arrived, Rosie was in the living room, packing some things. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked thoroughly satisfied. Seeing her like this, I suddenly understood why she had seemed off lately. She must have been cheating for quite some time. I felt like such a fool for not noticing earlier, but it wasn't too late now. When Rosie saw me, she wasn't nearly as warm as she had been this morning. "So you've decided to come home, have you?" she said sarcastically. I just grunted in response, which seemed to anger her even more. But I didn't try to placate her as I usually would. The memory of what I'd witnessed this morning made me feel sick. I pretended not to understand her mood and plopped down on the sofa to scroll through my phone. She stormed off to the kitchen to make dinner, banging pots and pans loudly as if to make a point. I quietly put on my headphones and began to execute the first step of my plan: contacting a private investigator. By the time Rosie finished cooking, my in-laws had returned from their day out, and I had given the investigator some instructions. My in-laws didn't look pleased to see me either. In their eyes, I was just a wage slave, but they seemed to have forgotten whose flat they were living in. If that's how they felt, I wouldn't mind taking the flat back as well. "Dad, Mom, you're back. Come and eat," Rosie called from the kitchen, completely ignoring me. As I made my way to the dining table, my father-in-law saw me and angrily said, "Can't you even walk properly? You look like a thug. Why can't you be more like Stanley? He's so polite." My father-in-law often compared me unfavorably to Stanley because Stanley earned one more digit than I did. Sometimes he even said he regretted marrying Rosie off to me, that he should have let her marry Stanley instead. But they seemed to have forgotten that before my family went bankrupt. They were the ones insisting on Rosie marrying me. Now that I'd fallen on hard times, they'd turned their backs on me. How despicable. I had no intention of arguing with my father-in-law. Until everything was settled, I needed to act as I always had. That would make things much more interesting. During dinner, it was the same as always. If they weren't criticizing me, they were berating me. They said I was this old and still useless, not helping with housework at home. They complained that my salary hadn't increased in years, preventing them from affording a holiday abroad. I pretended not to hear any of it. With £6 million in my pocket, their words were as meaningless as hot air. Back in my room, looking at the familiar bed, I inexplicably felt no desire to sleep on it. The thought of them doing such things on it this morning made me nauseous. Perhaps I only caught them once, but who knows what they've done without my knowledge. The very idea made even the floor seem dirty. "Why haven't you showered yet?" "I'm tired and want to sleep," Rosie's voice rang out beside me. I turned to see she had already finished her shower. Hearing her words, I smiled silently. Tired? Why tired? Wasn't it from her affair? Disgusting. "I'll shower outside. You go to bed early. I have some work to do, so I might not come back tonight," I said. As soon as I finished speaking, Rosie's face showed displeasure. However, she didn't refuse, just let out a small "oh" and got into bed. Seeing this, I immediately left, turning off the bedroom light as I went. After all, I'm the one who pays the electricity bill. In the study, I unconsciously let out a sigh of relief. It was too uncomfortable in the bedroom. I felt nauseous the entire time. After I showered, the detective I had hired in the afternoon had already completed his investigation and sent the results to my phone. I opened our chat, and he had sent a bunch of photos, videos, and explanatory text. He said Rosie had an affair just 2 months after our wedding. It wasn't with Stanley then, but with one of our former neighbors. I knew him too, but he moved away a few years ago. Stanley became her lover a year ago. According to the detective's investigation, their usual meeting times were when I was at work, and they were most wild during the period when I was away on business trips. There were many photos showing evidence of Rosie's affairs with different men, the neighbor, Stanley, and several others I didn't recognize. Although I knew Rosie was cheating, I hadn't imagined she was playing around this much behind my back. Besides investigating Rosie, I also had the detective look into Stanley. My good friend Stanley wasn't a decent person either. Reading those reports, I finally understood why Stanley's salary was so high. Apart from my wife, he was also involved with a female superior at his workplace, who was married as well. Another poor sod wearing green hat like me. Stanley's rapid promotions were all thanks to that female superior. The video I received was of Stanley and that superior. It was even worse than what he did with my wife. The detective said that, out of pity for my situation, he had also found a hacker who broke into my in-laws' social media accounts and found some dirt on them. I must say, this detective is truly capable and didn't even charge extra for this service. I added the hacker friend who sent me a ton of screenshots. The real show is just about to begin. The results of the hacker's investigation made me understand the saying, like father, like daughter, all too well. It turns out that my seemingly proper mother-in-law is actually a risque live streamer. She often starts streaming around 11 p.m. with content that could easily get her account banned. As for why she's been doing this for so long without her husband finding out, it's simply because my father-in-law goes to bed early, usually around 9 p.m., so he never discovers her activities. My father-in-law is no better. Despite his serious demeanor, he enjoys pretending to be young online, flirting with young women and housewives. The hacker was kind enough to send me some screenshots. There were images of my mother-in-law streaming, wearing inappropriate clothes, heavy makeup, and performing suggestive dances. It was too much for my eyes to handle. There were also chat logs of my father-in-law, apparently conversing with a housewife. His infatuated words made even me, a man, feel disgusted. After taking in all this information, my brain could hardly process it. I realized that I was the only normal one in this family. In the morning, Rosie didn't ask why I hadn't come home to sleep. She just made breakfast and urged me to eat quickly. It was obvious she wanted me out of the house so she could meet up with Stanley. Instead of obliging her, I deliberately ate slowly. I watched her face change colors like a kaleidoscope, which was quite a spectacle. When I was about to leave, Lucas said he wanted to go with me. Rosie's mother was still in bed. Knowing what I knew, I just smiled without saying anything. On the way to work, Lucas kept following me, which was unusual. In his eyes, I was just a useless wage slave, and having me as a son-in-law was embarrassing for him. He usually pretended not to know me in public, but today he was sticking to me like glue. I pretended not to notice and walked faster. He followed behind, panting. After a few minutes, I heard him angrily shout, "Why are you walking so fast? Are you in a rush to meet your maker?" Hearing this, I stopped, turned around, and pretended to look hurt as I said, "Dad, I'm going to be late for work. Didn't you always tell me to leave early? Otherwise, I'll be late and have my wages docked." Previously, when I was nearly hit by a car on my way to work, this father-in-law of mine, instead of showing concern, pointed at my injured self and scolded me. "A car accident? You didn't die, did you? It's just a small injury. Can't you, a grown man, handle this bit of hardship? What about being late for work and having your wages docked? Have you thought about us? Such bad luck." Now I was throwing his words back at him. Sure enough, after hearing what I said, Lucas looked embarrassed for a moment, scratching his nose. But it was only for an instant. He quickly reverted to his usual haughty self and said arrogantly, "Late? How can you be so weak? My daughter really got the short end of the stick marrying you. You've said all the good and bad things you wanted to say." I grumbled inwardly but showed no emotion on my face. Seeing that I didn't respond, he suddenly reached out his hand and said matter-of-factly, "Do you have any money? Give me £20,000. £20,000? Bloody hell. He really thinks I'm his family's slave. Dad, £20,000? That's a lot. I don't have that kind of money. You know, all my money is with Rosie. Rosie is my wife's nickname, though even saying her name now makes me want to vomit." After hearing what I said, Lucas berated me again, calling me useless, a freeloader, and every nasty name he could think of. I let him rant. After all these years, I've gotten used to it. "Dad, I really don't have any money." He looked exasperated and was about to say something else, but I quickly spoke up before he could. "I may not have money, but I know how you can get some." As soon as I said this, he eagerly asked, "What's the method? Tell me quickly." "Dad, you haven't told me what you need so much money for. Tell me first, otherwise it's hard for me to advise you." He hesitated for a moment before mumbling, Well, an old friend's child is sick and needs money urgently. We've known each other for years, so I should help, right? I nodded knowingly. I see. As if I'd believe that. When my family went bankrupt and my mum was in hospital, he didn't lift a finger to help us. Instead, he complained about my mum causing trouble and wasting money. Dad, I really don't have that much money, but I have a friend who does. It might require some effort on your part, though. I don't know if you're willing. What effort? As long as there's money, he responded eagerly, his greedy face right in front of mine. I lowered my voice. Well, my friend is in the property business. They've got a new project that's right opposite our estate. At this point, I became even more cautious. If you temporarily mortgage our house to him, you could make your money back in less than a month. You might even earn more than £20,000. Hearing this, he was clearly tempted. I pressed on. Think about it, Dad. The house is in your name now. Who could stop you from mortgaging it? Plus, my friend assured me there's hardly any risk. It's just a shame I don't have a house myself. Otherwise, I'd have done it already. I then put on a regretful expression. Lucas, desperate for money, no longer hesitated. His old face was filled with greed, as if he'd already made the money. He urged, What are we waiting for then? Let's go now. I still need to go to work. I might not have time right now. Hearing my excuse, he instantly became angry. What work? That lousy job of yours. What does it matter if you miss a couple of days? Sort this out for me first. The paperwork with my father-in-law was completed quickly. After all, these were people I had arranged, so how could the efficiency not be high? To make him trust me even more, I hired a smooth talker to pretend to be my friend, who charmed him completely. When he left, his face was beaming with joy, and he was even humming a tune. I made an excuse about going to work and stayed behind. Looking at the property deed in my hand, I thought to myself the first step of the plan was a perfect success. Afterwards, I went to the home of Lucas Wilson, the husband of Stanley Parsons' female boss with whom he was having an affair. Lucas Wilson was Stanley's biggest boss, and according to my investigation, he was now recuperating at home due to a car accident a few days ago. Interestingly, during my investigation, I discovered that Stanley was involved in Lucas' car accident. Before Lucas' accident, Stanley and that female boss were caught in the garage. The female boss's position was given by Lucas, so they came up with a plan to cause Lucas to have a car accident to kill him. This way, they would not only be safe but could also obtain Lucas' assets. However, this accident they designed wasn't very successful. Lucas didn't die but only suffered minor injuries. When I learned about all this, my heart was in turmoil, to say the least. There weren't many people at Lucas' house at this time. I successfully snuck in under the pretext of discussing business. When I saw Lucas, I finally understood why the female boss would have an affair. He was truly difficult to look at. However, this didn't interfere with my plan. I directly threw the evidence of his wife's affair and the relevant information about the car accident at him. After seeing it, he immediately flew into a rage. He probably couldn't have imagined that his usually gentle wife would do such a thing. I couldn't imagine it either at first, but it happened to me too. Didn't it? Damn it. How could she do such a thing? Lucas cursed at those documents. His face, pale from the car accident, was now flushed red. Damn it. I've been so good to her. And that vixen actually wanted me dead. I understood his feelings, so I didn't stop him. It wasn't until he was panting from cursing that I spoke up in time. Calm down. The reason I came this time is also to get revenge on them. Look, this man is involved with my wife, I said, pointing at Stanley in the photo. I want you to help me investigate this man's situation in your company, because I found he has quite a lot of money from unknown sources. Lucas agreed very readily. This wasn't just about male pride, it was also about his company. He had to agree even if he didn't want to. Afterwards, I also warned Lucas to be careful. I was afraid his wife and Stanley might do something again. I didn't want to lose another business partner. After talking with Lucas, I left. I didn't go home immediately. I took my £6 million and bought a car and several buildings. I've always been in this line of business, knowing which investments would profit and which would lose. Unfortunately, I didn't have the money before, otherwise I would have been rich long ago. Now that I have the money, my first move was to buy these buildings. They were rather dilapidated, so the prices weren't high. I quickly purchased 3 of them. I estimate I can at least double or triple my money on these 3 buildings. After sorting out these matters, I slowly boarded the bus to go home. There was no way I could drive the car back. Knowing my wife's family's temperament, they would surely try to snatch it away. When I got home, my father-in-law was sitting on the sofa, grinning stupidly at his phone. He seemed to be chatting with some young woman. My mother-in-law was nowhere to be seen, probably out shopping. I lay down on the opposite sofa and opened my phone. The detective had just sent me more photos, showing my wife and Stanley Parsons entering a hotel together this morning. What a pair of cheating scoundrels, so eager and impatient. Thinking this, I logged into the account the hacker had given me. He said this was the number my father-in-law used when flirting with others. He had done some tricks so that it could be logged in simultaneously on different devices, and the main account wouldn't detect it. So now, while my father-in-law was flirting on the other side, I could see everything clearly here. This look also made me understand what he did with that £20,000. The woman chatting with my father-in-law had recently run into some trouble. She said she wanted a divorce, but needed some money. That £20,000 was for hiring a lawyer. She said if she got divorced, she could come to my father-in-law. She didn't mind being his mistress, kept outside. But looking at the records, I knew she was just after the money. Only a fool like him would believe her. But none of this matters. I just need to get my house back and take my revenge on their whole family. As I was thinking this, my wife had finished cooking dinner. To my surprise, when my mother-in-law returned from shopping, Stanley Parsons was following behind her. Stanley often came to our house for dinner. Back then, I naively thought he just liked my wife's cooking. Now I know he actually liked my wife herself. Now, the way they looked at each other right in front of me, you could almost see sparks flying. I pretended not to know and excitedly went to welcome him, even introducing him to each dish my wife had made. I saw Stanley's face full of smiles, but through his eyes, I could still see contempt and mockery. Go ahead and look down on me. Otherwise, I'm afraid you wouldn't have this chance to appear in front of me anymore. During dinner, my wife and Stanley sat together. It had always been like this. Whenever Stanley came to our house for dinner, he would sit in my place. In the words of my wife's family, Stanley was a guest, so we had to be polite. I didn't know before, but now I do. They never considered me family at all. Stanley was their real son-in-law. The dinner table was calm on the surface, but only I knew that Stanley and my wife's legs were practically on fire under the table. After dinner, Stanley didn't stay long before leaving. My wife saw him out. I didn't try to take this opportunity away from them. After all, why should I disturb this pair of cheaters after dinner intimacy, right? How long had Rosie been dropping Stanley off? That's how long I'd been sitting in the living room. It must have been about half an hour before she came back. In that time, she could have made the trip to Stanley's house and back twice. My keen eyes noticed that Rosie's lipstick was smudged and her collar was rumpled. Looks like they had quite a passionate encounter. When she saw me sitting on the sofa, Rosie hesitated for a moment, but quickly started cursing. "What are you doing sitting there like a lump? Don't you know you nearly scared me to death?" Bloody hell. I laughed coldly to myself. It's you who has a guilty conscience. Why aren't you gone yet, you useless git? Is the telly really that interesting? Wasting electricity. She kept ranting and raving, showing none of the sweetness she had with Stanley. All right, I'm going to work now, I said, working on bringing down your family. All you ever do is fiddle with that rubbish. How much can you possibly earn? Why can't you be more like Stanley? As she continued her tirade, I went to my study. I took the screenshots the detective had sent me of Rosie's affair and turned them into a collage. I also edited the key parts of those little videos into one compilation. In the blink of an eye, It was nearly midnight, and I still hadn't showered. I quickly gathered a few clothes and rushed down to the bathroom on the ground floor, planning to make do. Unexpectedly, as I reached the corner, I saw my mother-in-law in the living room wearing a semi-transparent outfit, live streaming and writhing like a water snake. And here I was worried I didn't have enough evidence on my mother-in-law. This was perfect. I quickly took out my phone and recorded a few videos of her in the living room. Looks like that shower wasn't happening tonight. Since the paperwork for my father-in-law's property deal was taking a bit longer, I hadn't confronted them yet. Every day, those who needed to go out went out, and those who needed to pretend to work pretended to work. In the blink of an eye, almost a month had passed. Looking at the messages on my phone, I thought to myself, the show is about to begin. I put away my phone, sniffed an onion to bring some tears to my eyes. The performance must be perfect after all. Then, I had the driver drop me off a short distance from home. I ran back to the house. Dad, something terrible has happened. At this time, my mother-in-law should be out shopping, and Rosie was out too. Only my father-in-law was home, sitting on the sofa smiling at his phone. Hearing a sudden voice, he nearly smashed his phone into his nose. He sat up abruptly, shouting, "What's the rush? Are you being reborn or something?" "Dad, I'm so sorry, that friend who was selling the property, he's done a runner." Hearing this, he jumped up in fright, not even bothering about his phone anymore. He roared, "What did you say? What do you mean, done a runner?" "Dad, I had no idea this would happen. He told me just a few days ago that the property was almost ready. I never thought he'd run off. Now the house isn't ours anymore. The landlord just called, telling us to move out immediately. Otherwise, he'll call the police." I finished speaking, trembling, then lowered my head without saying anything more. I was afraid if I saw his ferocious face, I wouldn't be able to hold back my laughter. "You bloody idiot, what did you tell me at the beginning? And now the man's gone. What about my house? What about my money? How am I supposed to explain this to your mother? Ha! How can you be so useless? Can't you even judge people properly?" As he was cursing, he suddenly grabbed a teacup and threw it at my forehead. Luckily, I reacted quickly, or I'd have ended up in hospital. I hadn't expected the old bastard to be so vicious. "Don't worry. The suffering I'm enduring today, I'll return to you tomorrow. Dad, I'm truly sorry. I don't know what to do anymore," I said, genuinely at a loss since the house was in my name. "You're asking me what to do? You were the one who wanted to sell it. What's it got to do with me? I knew nothing about this," he retorted. His words made me laugh bitterly. What a bloody hypocrite. Before I could respond, I heard the front door open. It was my wife returning home. Her lipstick was smudged, and she hadn't bothered to reapply it. She was visibly startled to see me at home. "Why are you back?" she asked. Before I could answer, my father-in-law hastily interjected. "This bastard has sold our family home, and now the buyers disappeared." My wife, unaware of the full story, only caught the phrase, "the house is gone." Without waiting for my explanation, she strode over to me. Before I could react, she slapped me across the face. The stinging pain spread across my cheek. I covered half my face with my hand, remaining silent. At that moment, I was contemplating what fate they deserved to satisfy the pain of that slap. From the corner of my eye, I glanced at my father-in-law. I could see the smug look in his eyes. I kept quiet. I heard my father-in-law telling my wife to call her mother, urging her to come home quickly to teach me, this animal, a lesson. After my wife finished the call, I silently took out my phone and contacted Stanley to come over for a game of chess. He asked why it was so sudden, but I brushed off his concerns with a few words. He agreed to come over shortly. Then I contacted Lucas, asking him to bring his wife to my house, suggesting he tell her it was to meet a business partner if she was suspicious. Lucas had been itching for revenge against them for a while, so he agreed without hesitation. You see, the show was about to begin, wasn't it? In less than half an hour, my mother-in-law arrived. Like my wife, she started berating me without asking any questions. She even tried to hit me, but having learned my lesson, I dodged her attempt. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. They were shouting about selling my parents' heirlooms and divorcing me. Ding dong! The doorbell rang. As the door opened, Stanley and Lucas stood there with their wives. What a coincidence that they arrived together. I could sense the awkward atmosphere between them. After all, how could it not be uncomfortable when you meet your affair partner's husband? I greeted them with a smile, inviting them in. Lucas Wilson didn't hesitate, leading his wife inside, followed by Stanley Parsons. My father-in-law didn't know Lucas and his wife, but judging by their attire, he could tell they were wealthy. He was now bowing and scraping, offering them tea. However, the pleasantries were abruptly cut short by Lucas. "No need for tea. I'm here to catch a cheater," he declared. With those words, the room fell silent, except for me. I noticed Lucas's wife becoming visibly tense, especially Stanley, whose legs were shaking. "Darling, what are you talking about? What cheating? I don't understand," Lucas's wife exclaimed. Lucas let out a cold laugh and tossed out a stack of photos. The pictures were crystal clear, unmistakably showing Lucas's wife with Stanley. In that instant, the faces of Lucas's wife, Stanley, and my wife, Rosie, all turned pale. Lucas's wife and Stanley were frightened, while Rosie was in disbelief. "Honey, let me explain." Lucas's wife began, but before she could finish, Stanley fell to his knees in front of Lucas, pleading. "Mr. Wilson, I didn't mean to. She forced me into it. I never intended to make you a cuckold." What Stanley didn't realize was that Lucas was a man who cared deeply about his reputation. He'd rather believe Stanley had seduced his wife than accept that she had cheated willingly. It was a matter of saving face. Lucas's expression darkened further. But Stanley, completely oblivious, continued to beg for mercy. "Mr. Wilson, it really wasn't my fault." My wife, Rosie, stood by, unable to believe Stanley could be such a person. "Don't believe it? Your share is coming right up." "Enough!" I shouted. Stanley immediately fell silent, and I could feel his grateful gaze upon me. "Grateful? I don't need that." Then I pressed the TV remote. I had inserted the USB drive long before they arrived. This was the moment I had been waiting for. As soon as I turned on the TV, the video began to play. It was footage of my wife, Rosie, and Stanley in a compromising situation. "You must all be tired of arguing. Let's watch a video to relax," I said. Rosie froze, unable to utter a word. It was my mother-in-law who reacted first, screaming at me to turn it off. But how could I? The video needed to be shared with everyone. "You beast! Turn it off! How could you do this to Rosie? You animal, turn it off now!" she shrieked. Not fair to her? Did she think about being fair to me when she was cheating? How ridiculous. Seeing that I wasn't moving, my mother-in-law tried to snatch the remote from my hand, but she was too short to reach it. She could only keep yelling until she ran out of breath. Because the video had finished, and the next one started playing. It was a video of my mother-in-law's live stream, and so, the living room was filled with the sound of my mother-in-law's high-pitched voice calling out to her online followers. It was enough to make anyone sick. When my father-in-law saw it, his face turned green with anger. For a moment, he even forgot to tell me to turn it off. He slapped my mother-in-law across the face, causing her to fall to the ground. But he didn't stop there, he kept slapping her. "You whore, you shameless woman, have you no sense of decency?" he shouted as he continued to hit her. Seeing the commotion, Lucas Wilson didn't hesitate to start punching Stanley Parsons. The living room quickly descended into chaos. I was the only one who quietly called the police. Later, several police cars arrived at our house and took away four people. One was suspected of stealing company secrets and attempted murder, another for attempted murder, and two for distributing obscene material and involvement in prostitution. My wife was also injured in the incident and taken to hospital. When she woke up, she kept asking to see me, but I wanted nothing to do with it. No matter how much she begged like a dog, I was determined to divorce her. Divorcing a weak woman with no job who had cheated on me was simple. We were officially divorced in less than a week. I kicked her out of the house. After all, it was my home, not hers. Later, my in-laws were released. They tried to cause trouble for me, but I called the police each time to make an example of them and discourage the spread of obscenity. The police used them in a public awareness campaign that was shared throughout the entire neighborhood. I heard they slunk back to their hometown in disgrace. Meanwhile, I was being interviewed by the media. The properties I had bought were being demolished for redevelopment, and I made more than triple my investment. Overnight, I became a new star in the real estate world. Later, I heard from a relative that after my ex-wife returned to her hometown, she took up with a local thug. It turned out he had a sexually transmitted disease, which he passed on to her. With no money for treatment, she could only wait to die. For some reason, the story of my in-laws had also made it back to the village. They were now ostracized by the community and, unable to find work, were reduced to begging in the village, living a life worse than stray dogs. But what does any of this have to do with me? I'm Mr. Lloyd now, and they're nothing but strangers to me.